Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to this evening's Budget Committee meeting for the City of Salem. And if we could start with the roll call, please.
Mayor Bennett.
Here.
Member Kaser.
Present.
Member Anderson.
Likewise.
Member Name.
Here.
Member McCoy.
Here.
Member Ossick. Absent. Member Hoy.
Here.
Member Cook.
Here.
Member Lewis.
Here.
Member Nordike.
Here.
Member Tigan.
Here.
Member Sund.
Here.
Member Moore Green. Here. Member Bassett.
Here.
Member Judy.
Here.
Member Hazlitt. Absent. Member Bergman. Absent. Member Milton.
Here.
Okay, if you would all join me in the pledges of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, the next thing on our agenda is the minutes from the May 15th, 2017 City of Salem Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee meeting. I would entertain a motion.
So move. Second.
Okay. So moved by Nanke and seconded by McCoy. All right, any questions, comments? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Okay. Next on the agenda, this is the fun one for me, election of officers. So do we have any nominations, starting with the chairperson from the floor, Member Nanke?
Thank you. I would nominate Member Raquel Moore Green.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Who won the draw? Boy, okay.
Let's arm wrestle.
All right. There's been a first and a second. Any other nominations for chair?
I move we close the nomination.
All right. All those in favor?
Unanimous ballot.
All those in favor of Member Moore Green as the chair for the Budget Committee say aye. Aye. All right. Any opposed? Okay, good. All right. Next is for Vice Chair and Member McCoy.
I nominate Councilor Kaser.
Good.
Second.
Second by Anderson. Any other nominations? Good. All those in favor of the nomination say aye.
Aye.
All right. And then last on my duties is Secretary. And do I have any nominations from the floor?
I'll
Mayor
nominate
Bennett.
Councillor Hoy.
Second.
Second by Cook. All right. Any other nominations? Nope. Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So Moore Green, or Member Moore Green, if you are ready, or do you want to start at the next meeting? Might as well get it going now.
You want to try the gavel?
Take the chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it.
Somebody's got cheat sheet up there for me.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Start two.
He's been winging it this
What do
whole
you think kept
time.
me alive all
The
this
guy to your
time?
left will take care of you.
Casey, congratulations.
We're in a whole
And
new
worst case,
era
you
of
can just
budgets.
say,
In the worst case, right, worst case.
Or in the best case.
and for this item, it's Kelly.
Hopefully she's here every time. Should be.
Yeah.
Good job,
See
Jen.
my mail today, so Steve said his was in.
Yeah, he was Saturday musical chairs. Sunday. You Peter. Yeah, it was like Sunday.
Wow, all of you look really good. Hey, I might get used to this. All right. I would like to ask Budget Officer Jacobs to review the handout materials.
Thank you, Chair Moore Green. The handout materials in your packet that you received
via email, via the U.S. mail, they all have a presentation associated with them on this evening's agenda, so I'm not going to review those items, but I will speak to you just briefly about the things that we also left at your desk. You have a roster for the committee, a current roster, and that roster has council telephone numbers and council emails. The budget committee has private phone numbers, which we can change that if you desire. It also has a generic email address. And rather than providing your private email address on a public roster, we do this generic address, and if one of your constituents emails you, they'll email us, and then we'll distribute the email to you. So just as a means to maintain some privacy. So the second item on your table, I believe, was something relative to our strategic plan and the situation assessment, and Ms. Knox-Bush will be going over that with you later in just a few minutes. And then the last item is a budget in brief, and this is a publication that we do that just distills our about 700-page budget to 8 pages. So we thought you'd enjoy seeing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Officer Jacobs. So let's move on to agenda item 6A, which is the presentation from Courtney Knox.
There we go. That might be better. Okay. Let's move on to agenda item 6A, which is the presentation from Courtney Knox-Bush. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can just call me Courtney Bush, that's fine. Okay. It gets to the same place. Good evening. My name's Courtney Knox-Bush. The Knox is really just a stalling technique till I can remember who I am today. I'm really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you about the strategic plan. I work in the Mayor and City Manager's office, and I'm grateful again for this opportunity. We're really right back where we started on the strategic plan adventure. You all, in the Budget Committee, had this conversation as we were developing the 15-16 budget, right? Yes, 15-16 budget, about, now we're in 17-18. This is the casual part of the presentation. Anyway, so we had this conversation here about how it would be a useful thing to start thinking about how we wanted to make decisions as the community continued to grow and change over time. And that's where we started talking about a strategic plan as a tool to do just that. And so here we are. It's been a year of a lot of engagement and a lot of conversations around the community and with council. And we've got a strategic plan that was adopted or approved on October 23rd. And I'll just run through it a little bit for you. Before I begin, I'm kind of the straight man. I wonder if anyone on the council wants to provide some color commentary about the process and the outcomes before I get into talking through some of the more boring phases of the strategic plan. Anybody on council want to share?
No color.
No? Okay, great. Here we go. So the strategic plan is designed to help guide decision-making as we continue to grow and change as a community. And it is, the outcome is a 3 to 5 year lens or look for how we might prioritize investments as the community continues to grow. How did we do it? We did 3 distinct phases. We did a situation assessment, which is where we culled through everything we think we know about what the city does, and we asked a lot of people what they think about how the city does its work. We did a residential satisfaction survey, which was statistically valid, and we're planning to do that again in early December. And we presented the findings and the results to all of you midway through the situation assessment when we had done some interviews and we had just started really getting going and speaking in the community about what we were thinking about. So we did that in November. We came by and visited with you and gave you an update on what we were learning and what the consultant was thinking about what we were learning, which was also very useful. Then we did a strategic plan, and that really kicked off in earnest in March when the council had a work session and articulated vision, mission, and values for the city, and then started looking through all of this myriad of facts about the city and perspectives about the city, and self-assigned into some work groups that operated over the summer and inviting more public engagement and views from folks who wanted to come in and participate in the discussions, and really started working through 7 broad areas for this policy direction. What we're doing now, and we'll be doing for a while, is transitioning to a council policy agenda format. And what that means is a policy agenda is really going to be the annual direction to staff that will start to shape the budget in a different way than we've done before. And we'll learn more about that later in another presentation. We're going to be starting to articulate how we're going to achieve those outcomes that the council and the community defined in the strategic plan, what we can do first in year 1, what we might push into year 2, and thinking out into the next 3 to 5 years. So the vision. A vision is an overarching statement that talks about where you want to be in the future. And what we have from council is an intent to be a safe and livable capital city with a sustainable economy and an environment that's open to all. So that's the vision that's anchoring the strategic plan and should anchor everything we do as we move forward. The mission is what we do, who we are. Our mission is to provide fiscally sustainable and quality services that enrich the lives of present and future residents, the quality of our environment and our neighborhoods, and the vitality of our economy. And you can see a lot of breadcrumbs here that we can use to analyze our performance and make sure that we're doing those things that council's asked us to do as we move forward. The values are the how. This is how council wants us to be thinking as we move forward. They want us to be thinking about being proactive and thinking about the future. You could see that in the mission and vision as well, thinking about today and thinking about the future as well. You can see the intent to be compassionate, being fair, equitable, and safe. The intent to maintain our at your service perspective as we're delivering services. Also intending to build more partnerships as we move into the future, and being open and inclusive. So we went out, we did all of that outreach, and council got to consider all of the feedback. Here's some of the key points from the situation assessment, and you have a cheat sheet on your desks. It's just a 2-sided. It summarizes everything that's in the 29-page situation assessment, which is online if you want to learn more. But in general, we got a lot of good feedback. 66% of those who responded, this was a 450-person poll. It was to cell lines and landlines. 66% of those who responded said that the city's going in the right direction. We also, after we read a list of services that the city provides, 92% of the folks who responded said that they were very satisfied or somewhat satisfied with the services the city provides. That's pretty good. It's remarkable. In particular, people were really pleased with our emergency services. We had about an 88% favorability rating there. Parks and Recreation at about 85%, and our arts and culture, which was about 73%. So that's pretty positive. The opportunities really focused, where we heard the most from folks, is getting more clear on our vision for growth and development, how development, land use, and planning are all working together. How our infrastructure and our transportation also feed sort of how that feedback loop really works. We heard access to housing. We didn't really know that this was a big issue going in. We didn't ask about that, but overwhelmingly people wrote in, or wrote in the findings, but what we heard from people was housing, homelessness, and social services were really important, and that the city needed to be doing something more there. We heard from the consultant team a concern about how well the city is positioned to evaluate its policy decisions, that we need a little bit more horsepower there, and we also heard that communications could still be improved. We were making some marked improvements, but we could still do more there. So again, council heard all of this, and you can see sort of some feedback from one of our first open houses on the screen. How do you decide what's important with all of this information and all of this feedback? So the council took all of this feedback, and in March they decided on 7 broad priorities for the next 3 to 5 years, and these are the priorities. I'm going to step through them, and I want to just, an analogy that I like to use when I talk about this is it's sort of like an iceberg, and the things that the strategic plan are focusing on are those things that are above the water, those things that are most critically important right now to the council and to the community. It doesn't necessarily, the strategic plan doesn't necessarily address everything that's sort of below the water. You'll notice that public safety is missing. Well, we just heard that the community is pretty satisfied with how we're doing there. And so that's not really a focus for the next 3 to 5 years in terms of a strategic priority. But the mission, vision, values give us clear direction to continue to maintain those services and do them well at the quality that the community has expected of us. So I just want to be clear that the strategic plan is focusing on 7 priority areas for the next 3 to 5 years. It doesn't address everything the city does, but the mission, vision, values give us enough tools to continue to move in those directions and continue to provide those services well. So the 7 issues are vision for growth and development. This has to do with creating a comprehensive long-term vision for the future of Salem, and we've already last year funded the intent to do some visioning and do a comp plan amendment, and those things are moving forward. In the area of affordable housing, social services, and homelessness, we are asked to implement a housing first strategy and provide accessible health and social services for Salem residents. On the first page of your strategic plan, by the way, it lists out the plan on a page. So all of this is encompassed on the first page. So you don't have to read any further if you want to know this much. If you want to know more details about some suggestions for actions moving each one of these things forward, those are in the in the rest of the strategic plan as you move into the background. Another area of interest is economic vitality. That has to do with job growth and business growth, and it also has to do with the downtown and keeping it vibrant and with low commercial vacancy and improved public amenities with housing for everyone. On the critical infrastructure front, there's an intent to simplify and streamline how we do infrastructure and master planning so that they're better aligned with the community and the council's goals. And then in the area of fiscal sustainability, there's an intent to better align services with the resources that we have available. In public transportation, there's an interest in making sure that our public transportation system meets the community's needs, and we're moving forward with the city's transit committee and other efforts there. And then as it relates to environmental action, there's an intent to develop a community-wide environmental strategy, which would measure both the community impact as well as the city's services and the city's delivery of services on the environment. So what's next? I mentioned earlier that we're starting a residential satisfaction survey again this December. We're going to be testing the same questions that we did last year, keep the baseline, and learn more about how we're progressing and how the perception of the services that we provide is progressing in the community. January 16th, the City Council is going to meet in a work session, and that's where the City Council will define its priorities for year 1, which will become the policy agenda that we'll then use to further the budget. We'll be managing to this policy agenda over the course of the year. The fiscal year will begin, and in the fall, bless you, we're going to be starting a report on our progress to the community. And then in December, again, we'll start the residential satisfaction survey and keep moving in that way. So are there any questions about the strategic plan? That was pretty quick. It's a lot. It was a year. A lot to do quickly. Any questions or comments? Yes. Hello, Member Hilton. How are you? I haven't seen you in a long time.
I know. Hey, quick question.
Use the microphone.
So
So quick question, how many residents did you say this was contacted with, and how did they come up with the contact list?
Okay, so in our statistically valid sampling, that is a sample of registered voters, and they try to mirror the population as best as they can with some voter information. But then we did much broader outreach over the course of, it started in January. We had about 300 people at an open house at the end of January. Because of the snow, we got a little bit delayed. We had another almost 300 people in June at an open house. And then we had our last open house in September, and our numbers were down a little bit. We were down to about 90, but we did have about 600 people complete an online survey over the course of 2 weeks during that time period. So at each step, we were trying to get a little bit more information about priorities for what people think the city should or could be doing to improve conditions in the community.
So roughly that amount would be?
Overall, the number of people we touched?
Yes. Or
oh my goodness.
To get the results of this survey?
The results of the statistically valid survey? That was 450. And there's a summary of that survey online as well from last December.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, Councilor McQuaid.
Thanks, Courtney. So the survey you're talking about now in December is going to be another statistically valid sampling of 450,
Yes, please.
right? Same exact thing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Yes.
So, as far as neighborhoods are concerned, you weren't doing it by neighborhood?
It's challenging to get really good sampling at that small of a population, but we did try to get quadrants, equal representation of quadrants inside the community, and we were a little shy in representation from the east.
Right. I was going to say, I mean, your statistics might be much lower if you were going to the east and the north.
Yes. Any other questions? No?
Great job.
Well, thank you very much. Have a good afternoon, evening.
Thank you, Courtney. Okay, next on our agenda will be a presentation by our Deputy City Manager, Casey Duncan, and he's going to share with us the general fund for fiscal year 2016 to 17, the year-end results, and the current status of our 2017-18 budget initiatives and proposals for the upcoming budget process and document publication.
Excellent. That sounds like a lot of exciting content, and we will breeze through this fairly quickly. It's tough to follow on the heels of Courtney, who summarized in great detail a year's worth of work. And I want to again thank the Budget Committee and the Council for your investment in this effort. And we'll speak later on in a number of ways that we're receiving benefits, and we're looking at our own processes to enhance those processes into the future because of the work and the foundation that has been laid through the strategic planning process. So starting first with item 6B, I'll go over this in a little bit of detail, as I understand that the U.S. Mail Service may not have got this to you in a great deal of advance, and you may not have had the opportunity to look through it. But starting with the first slide, which speaks to the general fund revenue analysis. This is looking at our revenues, and I do need, as a good accountant would, to give a disclaimer that these are unaudited figures that were in the course of being audited, and those figures will be available sometime later in December, but these are subject to change slightly into the future. With that disclaimer, looking at the bottom line on the revenue there, you can see that we had some good growth in our total revenues, about 4.8% year-over-year increase in the general fund. And on the right, if you can see, that breaks down some of our larger categories of revenues and the dollar increases that we experienced from year to year, as well as the percentages. Property tax grew by about 4.3%, or $2.6 million from year to year. So we are beginning to see those properties that were in compression come out of compression, in addition to receiving that 3% assessed valuation growth that were allowed by state law. And in addition to that, development is occurring in Salem, and we're experiencing some of the positive impacts related to that. Franchise fee growth was also positive. There was one agreement that was negotiated that brought in some one-time dollars there, and some of the fee increases for various utilities, such as electric and refuse, led to some increases in our franchise fee revenue, with a total increase of about $500,000 year over year. Rents increased by about $600,000. About 80% of that increase was attributed to the fact that we now have our new parking meter technology installed near the Capitol Mall area. And last session was a full legislative session. We always see a spike in our rents during the full session versus the short 2-month session. The increase you see to all other categories listed there, which is significant as far as the percentage goes, but is primarily attributed to a couple of one-time payments. One, a grant that allowed us to replace the fire department's self-contained breathing apparatus, the grant of over $650,000, which was an 80% of that total cost. In addition to some land that was sold at the Mill Creek Corporate Center that provided some funds to the city to offset our planning services as well as public safety to the area, and that was $355,000 one-time payments. Question?
Just to make sure I understand what you're saying, this is that we were 5.2 million over actual revenue from the prior year.
That's correct.
How does that compare to what we budgeted?
We exceeded our revenues by about $1.5 million, if I remember the number correctly.
So we have 1.5 million roughly more.
And we'll talk about that as we get to a later slide showing what we spent and what we brought in.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to the expenditures. As you can see here, the total expenditures were just over $115.5 million. The percentage increase year over year was about 9.2%. Some of the significant increases had to do with some one-time costs, as well as we did add in the budget year some positions that were previously unfilled in several departments we were able to fill, as well as we saw an increase in some of the capital outlay items that I alluded to earlier that were one-time expenses. Parks and Recreation saw an increase of about $1.2 million, and with that, about $550,000 was a result of a transfer to our construction fund to take on some major projects within our urban parks. We had a $3 million increase for the police department, $3.6 million in the fire departments, and about a $600,000 increase in our IT department, largely as a result of, as I mentioned, filling some positions that had remained vacant for a long period of time. So when you look at the actuals on both the revenues and expenditures, you'll see there that expenditures of $115 million offset by $114 in revenue led to a result in working capital, a decrease in working capital of about $1.3 million. And that was the most significant increase that we've seen in a reduction to working capital since fiscal year 2007, when there was about a $2.8 million decrease.
Could you comment on that, please, Casey? I like it was the most significant increase in the decrease, I believe, was your statement.
If I stated that, I apologize.
Yeah. Well, I understood it, but I'm saying we're now back to the thing that we talk about all the time, that when we add things in on the wish list, the response we often get from the administration is, the Thelma and Louise Cliff analogy, and so, you're pointing that out to us that in 10 years, this is the most significant increase in the decrease we've had. Do you have anything else to say other than the standard stuff we've heard through the last budget meetings, that there's a concern on the staff that we need to have the working capital at a higher level than the council seems to and the budget committee seem to want to say when we're done with the process?
We can speak to that. I think last year was also spoken to during the budget process that there was a planned approach to how we were going to go about this, that we were fortunate to have some legislation passed that afforded us about $7 million to working capital. And We recognize that this would be the point in time when we saw an inversion in the revenues and expenditure line, and that we were going to have to be thoughtful moving forward. The fortunate thing is we ended the year with about $26.8 million in working capital, so we are still above the 15% policy that we attempt to keep.
And was that end in working capital greater than what had been anticipated?
During April, when we came to the committee with a reforecast, it was about $300,000 greater than we anticipated at that point. So,
which is kind of peanuts on the overall situation. So you're pretty darn close.
We ended the year very close as far as property tax projections and revenue projections and expenditures at the end of the year. And I'm sure we'll have much more discussion about this on December 13th when we come back with a forecast. This is, there. Okay. So as I mentioned, we'll come back with a more detailed forecast. This is just taking a look and seeing that if we were to account for a new base of about $1.5 million in additional revenue over what we had budgeted for, and also factor in that when you look at the overall budget, there was about a 4% savings citywide. If those trends were to continue and we're to see property tax growing at the rate that we forecast, which was almost right on to what they came in at in the previous year, this is what it would look like. It is an improvement over previous year's forecast, but this high-level forecast still shows that by 2022, we would be down to $6.2 million. In that policy that I alluded to of 15% of current year revenues, we would go below that policy by the end of fiscal year 2020. All right, moving on to the enhancements report. Any other questions about the variance analyses? Yes, Councilman McCoy.
I'm looking at, this is what I got in the mail. The little arrows and
Yes,
stuff,
yes.
Which is the same thing. It's quite, as I looked through it, Casey, and we, whoops. We've had this discussion over, but in every explanation of the variances, I went back and checked them. Almost every explanation for the variance was personal services, personal services, personal services, personal services. Otherwise, we've got FTEs we're not filling. We can't fill it. We can't fill quickly enough. We get that answer every year, and it just seems like it's just an ongoing thing. I sometimes wonder, frankly, do we have too many FTEs scheduled, given the fact that we keep working year after year after year with, I don't know what the percentage is, but it must be 3 or 4%.
Sure.
Empty at all times.
What I can say is you'll see we are a human capital heavy corporation with about 75% of our expenditures coming from personal services. And so the variances you see oftentimes will allude to the fact that in the previous year there were some vacancies that weren't filled that are filled this year, therefore that department saw a little bit of a spike, or vice versa. This year there were a couple of unfilled positions that have not been filled. What I will say as far as savings a result from those positions, that's built into our projections into the forecast. We look forward. We count on a certain number of savings to naturally take place due to the fact that someone could retire, and by the time we post their position and go through the recruitment process, it could be a number of weeks or months before they come on board. We also factor that in as we build the budget with our what we call our cost of pay plan, where you might bring someone in at a different level versus someone who's been here for 20 years. So all those factors are taken into account as we try to build the budget and move it forward.
What is that percentage, basically? Do you have a ballpark figure what that percentage would be?
Well, it was 4.2% last year, the total amount that we saved in both personal services and capital outlay.
Thanks.
I had some questions on the material that Councilor McCoy was talking about. Is now the right time to do that?
Sure.
Okay.
Budget Officer Jacobs can approach the podium as well.
You big chicken.
No, I'm ready.
Okay.
Back up.
I'm looking at page 3. So
I
we're,
always like it when your questions start with, I'm looking at.
yes, to help, page 3.
All right.
Only my pages have colored things on them, and
Yes.
yours are black
Yeah,
and
we
white.
went all out for you.
I can see that.
No.
Yeah. And I don't know that I'm getting as sophisticated as Councilor McCoy, but I look at these, and on the left-hand side, actual to budget, they're all yellow, but you're not yellow. They're all negative figures, which, as far as I can figure from what you're talking about, that's a good thing.
That means we underexpended our budget.
That's right. So we've got some money there. But then I look on the other side, year over year, that's all green.
That's a level of increase year over year.
So is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
Well,
or
it's-
is it
it's-
just a neutral thing?
It's yes, someone said reality, and it is a reality. It's what we would anticipate that our expenses would increase year over year. I mean, because as Deputy City Manager Duncan said, we are FTE heavy. That's where our costs are, especially in the general fund. And so when those costs for people increase, we would anticipate seeing these costs increase.
So when I look at this, none of the year over year, maybe not, yeah, I think none of them, well, except for urban development, it looks like the increase year over year is greater than the cost saved in the budget year just completed.
I would agree with you.
Okay, so
Yes.
that doesn't sound like a good thing to me.
Well, once again, not altogether unanticipated.
Okay.
We as Deputy City Manager Duncan said, we anticipate a certain level of savings. We know we're going to have some level of attrition, so we do anticipate savings. We budget as if every position were filled.
All right.
And so by virtue of doing that, we will anticipate some level of savings during the course of the year. We do expect costs to increase year over year. That is not outside of our expectations.
Sure. Budget Officer
Yeah.
Jacobs. So we're back now to the general fund fiscal year variance analysis, that if the greens are higher than the yellows, the lines are going to get separated further.
That's an interesting way to analyze that situation. But I will tell you, I will
Listen,
concur with...
interesting is the word that I taught my children to use when they couldn't say anything nice about the situation. Yeah.
I'm not going to fault your analysis, but I will be bringing back additional analysis in December.
Okay, thank
And
you.
you'll be able to comment on that.
I'm sure I will. Thanks.
Okay, if there are no further questions, we'll move on to the budget enhancements. So some highlights from the report that you each received, starting first with the Homeless Rental Assistance Program, $1.4 million, making good progress underway with 36 active clients and 11 that are currently housed. I believe total expenditures to date in that area have been close to $120,000. The comprehensive plan update, there are a few. Question?
I have a question on the homeless deal. In here it says that, around the country, they've had success when they staff these kinds of programs with 15 clients to each full-time employee. Since we've got one three-quarter employee for 100. So I guess my question is, we're right now at 36, or what we got, 18. So we're about basically that one person's at max according to these national.
They are actively seeking grant funding and other available opportunities to be able to bolster the assistance there and make that program more effective.
Okay, so if they don't get it, are we going to slow down because we don't have the folks to basically...
Based on the information that they have provided to us, they are still anticipating being able to bring 100 on into the program. The issue we're currently having is finding housing due to the shortage.
So how many are they planning? Again, if we went by national standards, they'd have 6 or 7. Right. Are they planning on 6 or 7? Or are they hoping for 2 or 3, or what?
I can't speak to the number. And Director Wilch isn't here. We could email that information back to you.
Question, if I could, for Casey, is it possible, some of these things in the enhancement program are one-time items, like the
That's correct.
comprehensive update. Some seem to be ongoing until we decide not to. Can you, as you go through these, can you list the ones that are ongoing and the ones that aren't?
Sure. I believe at this point, we would be treating item 1 as an ongoing item. Item 2 is, I'd like to say one time, but I believe that's budgeted for half of the total cost to engage in that process. And currently with the State Street corridor plan, in addition to some West Salem code cleanup, our planning is heavily active and involved, but they're working on things that will feed into creating this vision for growth and development. So by the end of the year, their hope is to have a project plan in place and also a contractor and begin some of the initial discussions on that comprehensive plan. The next item, deferred maintenance. So the update on this is we're waiting the outcome of tomorrow's election, the library bond, to determine where are the immediate needs and do we use this funding. If we were to go out and get a loan to do some work, more than likely it would be a 10 to 12 year loan, so that costs and becomes ongoing for the next 10 to 12 years to address some deferred maintenance issues. The next one would be a one-time item. I understand that the design and some initial estimates are in place, and that the Parks Foundation is working on obtaining some funding for the playground equipment, so that it's progressing, and funds have been allocated in both the construction and operations budget for that this year. The fire marshal position brings the total number of fire marshals up to 5, and that would be an ongoing expense. And then the restroom pilot project would also be ongoing to this point in time. I believe it's working well, and if the cost of the program were to continue out, it would be about $2,000 a year here at the Civic Center.
Has the fire marshal position been filled?
It has been filled, yes. I believe that position started around the 1st of September.
Thank you.
So any other questions on these items? Okay. Yes.
How much of the 1.4 million for homeless rental assistance program have we actually spent?
About 120,000 to date.
So based on that pace, we're probably going to not need new money for next year. We'll be able to carry some of this over.
I think they'll take a look at where we end the fiscal year and what's still available and what's required for next year.
Thank you.
All right, in the last item, I'm also going to bring Officer Jacobs forward to talk a little bit later about the budget document in and of itself. But one thing that we've discussed and we've seen here at the city is that in the past, one might say that the budget was our primary planning document for the city. And what we've gone through with the strategic planning process is having another guide to help us build our fiscal plan around how to achieve those objectives. So one of the strategic plan goals is to refine our budget process and to incorporate strategic planning, as well as the council, as Courtney alluded to, coming together in January with the policy agenda to really give direction into the next, she's talking 3 to 5 years, but looking at it from the budgetary perspective, what needs to be included in this budget. So this is a sketch of what it may look like with the community outreach that's taking place, the statistically valid survey, as well as a number of outreach opportunities that have gone in complement with the strategic planning. We're meeting today to talk about this and working on some forecasting. Come back in December, and all of that work really feeds into council's work plan and policy discussion. There's also work currently in process and will be underway with rate setting, CIP, several other important items that feed into the budget. One change to this process, we're really hoping to get input earlier on, and I look at Councilor McCoy and his famous baked cake analogy, and so we want to get a little more direction as to how you might like the ingredients prepared for that. In addition to seeking community input that has gone into the strategic planning process and helping us know, in addition to the day-to-day operations, the things that are important, our mission, vision, and values, tying back our budgetary expenses to outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And so this will be an iterative process. I anticipate we'll go through a couple of different iterations as we refine and improve. And one important aspect to that, as I mentioned, we'll be starting to prepare the budget later in the year than we typically would because we're getting direction or waiting for that direction. And so what that will mean is we'll be likely to have fewer budget committee meetings at the end of the process. And rather, we're looking at ways for departments to explain to the community what it is that they do through a different manner versus here before the budget committee. And so we'll spend more time discussing in a couple of meetings the budget and then have a third meeting to adopt that budget, or to recommend that budget, I should say, to the city council. So that's the hope that we have in incorporating our strategic planning process into the budget. Yes.
Casey, are there any other strategic plans outstanding? I'm thinking, the one I'm thinking of, I think right now is the fire department, but are there any others besides that we'll be seeing during this budget cycle?
Yeah, that's correct. I know that they're working on their standards of operation policy, and that's likely to come before the council before the budget is adopted.
How will the outcome of that plan be incorporated into the budget? Will the manager pull that in, or will the budget committee have to analyze it, or the council, and then how will that work?
I speak on the manager's behalf. I have not spoken with him directly about this and to his plan for that. I anticipate that that will be, it could be a future work session with the council to discuss. I don't know the exact planning behind that.
Well, I'd like it, just as one counselor, I'd like to have him explain when this comes in, how that will be incorporated into the budget document.
So, and if I might say is, I'll have Kelly bring up the budget document reformat. That the hope is to tie these programs to outcomes that are desired. And, we hope to be a safe and livable capital city. And so, as Courtney discussed in her presentation, safety is still a big part of this, and what's needed to be provided, what is needed in this community, and we want to provide. And so it's important that through, whether it be the department's strategic planning process or looking at their operations, that there are outcomes that we're desiring to achieve, and they're incorporated into a document like this that's more outcome-based. So that's a very valid and good point, Mayor. Councilor McCoy.
I've been thinking about this. We've got 7 value groups in the strategic plan, and has there been much thought given to how we're going to go about choosing what we're going to focus on? Are we going to focus on 4 of the 7? Or are we going to try to do something for each of the 7? Or, it just seems like, when you get to 6 and 7 different things you're trying to fund and or deal with, it's getting, maybe we're overreaching. But on the other hand, if that's the case, how do we choose what among the 7 we're going to focus on first, moving forward for 2 or 3 or 4 years?
Sure.
How are we going to go about that? Is that what's supposed to occur at the January
Our
meeting?
hope would be that the January meeting can be some open dialogue and discussion about that, in getting direction on what can we do and accomplish feasibly.
So that's what I was thinking. It seems, it's just my opinion, that's sort of a weighty problem, and if we walk in there in January and say, okay, we got this issue, what do you think? I'm not sure we're going to get there in one meeting, trying to hassle that through versus, we don't even have a process yet. I mean, you're asking us to walk in, develop a process, and then apply the process and come out with an end result to move forward in one meeting. And I guess after 3 years of experience, the likelihoods of that occurring are not, I don't think, it'd be a big ask. I'd be surprised if we could do that. So I'm just throwing it out there. I think we better be looking, we're going to have a dialogue first on what that process is so we can apply that process in our decision-making meeting.
Yeah, that's a very valid point.
I am just not quite sure, Councilor McCoy, what's your ask? What's your concern about not being able to do it in the, I'm just not clear.
I mean, we don't have a process yet how we're going to go about
Prioritizing
goals? Deciding what we're going to, what is it we want to work on this year? What is the process? How are we going to go about that? We've got 7 different value. So if you don't go all 7, all of a sudden you're another year in and 2 or 3 haven't even been addressed.
So your concern is staying to the plan?
My concern is, what is our process going to be in a new approach? How are we going to approach this? What's our decision going to be? And have that process, whatever it is we agree on we're going to do, ready for the other one. I just think if we walk in there in January trying to do all this at once, it's going to be hard to get it done. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. That's my point, too, that Councilor Nanki just raised. If we're going to have to, if we can't do them all, and I'm sure we can't do them all, we're going to have some sort of priority. And one of the ways that might help us in our prioritization is, what is number 3 going to cost? What is the number 5 going to cost? And then how much money do we have?
Right.
And in that kind of situation, some of it is going to be staff time, and that's a little more flexible than purchasing and adding additional things, but we need to know. And I'm sure of the 7 areas, some of them aren't going to cost much, if much of anything, and some of them could cost. So, it would be helpful. And that doesn't mean that, I personally am going to say I don't want to vote for, prioritize it by saying the one that costs the most is going to have the lowest priority. But that's another factor. Yeah, it's another factor I'd like to see before we start to make those kind of decisions if we have to prioritize.
Sure. And I would expect that to be the case.
Councilor McCoy?
One other thing that just popped in my head, I read these, I got this at home this afternoon, so I got to read it. I think one of Kelly's points would be, and probably Casey's too, some of this, we can almost reach some of these goals just within the budget we've got in the normal day-to-day operation, and it might be changing some way we do something within it without really having to fund it. We've got the funds there to do it. Is that sort of what you were saying? I think in some of these, right? Yeah. Okay.
May I make a comment? Thank you.
Go ahead and call on yourself.
I want to be polite about this, okay? Well, so if I understand this document, the Salem Strategic Plan, okay? So for each one of these areas, each one of the priorities, so for instance, if you go to page 10, which is the affordable housing, social services, and homelessness, it states that the city budget already includes the money in it. So in my mind, I've gone through these to see where, is there going to be an added cost to doing something. And as far as I can tell, there are only 2 that don't specifically state where money is already parked or will come from. So I think that we're on a good trajectory for this. However, how do we wrap it into what we are doing, I think is to the point.
And we are making notes of all the concerns and information that will be necessary to bring back, and much of what you've mentioned is something that I would expect us to bring back in order to facilitate that decision-making process and allow you to do so with the best information available.
One of the things that city staff can perhaps assist us with in this process is identifying what I would call the low-hanging fruit. As Chair Moore Green mentioned, some of these priorities, some of these objectives might be easily achieved if they've already been clearly budgeted, they've been clearly identified, and there's consensus around enacting certain proposals. You can do that if it's clear which ones are easy to enact like that. And some will require a lot more process and a lot more discussion. But to the extent that if you want to get some good bang for buck right off the bat, we can encourage city staff to identify the low-hanging fruit that's easy for us to reach decisions, make some motions, and make some rulings on right off the bat, whatever they might be.
Sure. And if I would just make comment that this was really envisioned to be 3 to 5 years. So while there might be some low-hanging fruit to progress in those areas, I don't think there was any overarching goal that will be accomplished relatively quickly. It's going to take some time and some process and have some sequence of steps, but you're right. Part of it will be the day-to-day activities, a small portion, and others will be outside the normal scope and will require us to perhaps reprioritize where we're allocating staff and other resources.
This is part of the challenge of working with a bunch of type A people, right? Councilor Cook.
So just to build on what Courtney had mentioned in the beginning, really viewing the strategic plan as the lens on how we prioritize things. I really recognize that there's a lot of things happening in the city. The city has a lot of working parts. But if we're looking at the strategic plan where our priorities are outlined and where we're trying to move forward on that top part of the iceberg, it should help to make things easier for those decisions. It should help to facilitate that process that we talked about, where you might be concerned, well, how are we going to do this when just one meeting? How are we going to get through? If the plan is guiding us through that, it won't just be that one meeting. It'll be the previous meetings where we've already done the work. Am I understanding that right? Or, okay. So that makes me feel confident because it's not one meeting, it's apparently the last several, so.
Any other comments, questions? Are we good?
All right, so Kelly, would you like to explain some of the potential changes to the budget document itself?
Bring my prop. So what we provided to you in your U.S. Post Office mailed packet, your emailed packet, and the packet that's on the website is an idea for reformatting the budget document. And what Courtney explained earlier about finding those breadcrumbs in the council's vision, mission, and value statements, we think that we can, with those statements, we can pull together some service areas and display the budget in a different way. And this is an example of a display for public safety services. And in this example, I have grouped police, fire, and municipal court. Now, that may not ultimately be how we define the grouping of public safety, but for the purposes of this illustration, that's what I've done. And just from the perspective of trying to align this budget with the strategic plan, mission, vision, values, with our new community-centric website, having that continuum of information so that the community is seeing things in a similar way. And so it makes it easier for folks, I hope, to navigate this information. With this, just as an example, the things that you see here, and it's about 22 pages, I believe, those same things are in this big book, this 700-page book, behind 9 different tabs. So to find this same information that's condensed here for you in this example, it's quite a voyage through this book. You get to know this book by trying to find all of those various parts. So, as I said, this is just an example, and in my envisioning what this example might look like, it includes, and this is very small and I apologize for that, but it includes grouping all of these things so that the community could see, budget committee members can see, the council can see that for public safety services, these are all the resources that we would have available for public safety services. And in this example, you're getting a lot of historical information, you're getting some comparative information with budget to actual. So you're getting that for both resources and expenditures. So this is the cost, this is the resources available for public safety services and the costs associated with public safety services, just in one page. It's all right there. This next page is very much unformed. it was, and I've already received some great feedback from one of our Budget Committee members in regard to it, but in doing this, we want to be able to display the key progress and performance measurements that we will be eventually developing and using to tell our story and to tell the community about the progress that we're making with the budget and how we're supporting the strategic plan and any other community outcomes that are formed as a part of your prioritizing services if you do that. This is, as I said, it's just simply an example. These are just for example purposes, but I can imagine that at some point we would want to attempt to make some, where a tie exists with the strategic plan, we would want to create that tie. And so you see that in the example under sustainable services delivery, where I've created a tie for the police department and the fire department. And then a safe capital city. We hear that, we see that, we read that in the mission, vision, and values, and so this is responding to that as kind of a core mission of the city. So again, just for example purposes. The next pages are just very brief in terms of a summary of services and any workforce changes relative to the budget that is highlighted here. This would just be very brief and provide just a little insight into what the department provides. Program pages, this example, for the police department, these are very much in depth for the police department in the current publication. This 2 pages that you see here for Police Department General Fund is covered in about 9 or 10 pages in the budget book. So I've very much condensed this. What I can imagine that we would include here is just maybe a very brief sort of enhancement to the description of what the program is, but not to extend the amount of reading that you would have to actually gain some insight into what these program budgets are all about. The opportunity that we have with our new database, and the council has heard me say this many times, it's our board database that you allowed us to purchase, and I thank you, I think, at least once a year, allowing us to make that purchase because it's fantastic. We have all of the data that's in this book is now in that database. It used to be that this book, this actual published book, was the repository for all the data. That's no longer the case. The data is in the database where it should be. And so it gives us the flexibility to experiment with how can we make the budget more accessible. And we think we're incredibly transparent because we're providing you with all of this information. But with all of this information and varying levels of ability to navigate that information, we're probably not as transparent as we think. We're probably actually pretty opaque for most people because it's a lot of information to go through. We can provide a budget publication that is actually easier for folks to navigate, and just know that all the information that's in this book is in the database. So if anyone would ever want it, we could make it immediately available. It just doesn't necessarily need to be published in the book. So that's what you're seeing here, is where I've condensed the program descriptions to just 2 pages, and previously in the book they're 9 pages. There are a lot of words associated with the program descriptions. They're important words. It gives a good explanation regarding what the police department does with each one of its programs, but it doesn't necessarily need to be published in the budget book. So I've done the same thing for all of the public safety programs. Very brief, just FTE counts, program costs, and a very brief description of the program. And then it moves into more line item detail, and for those of us who can't get away from it, I have to do it. I can't get away from it, so I'm going to invite you into my little special problem of needing to see this data, but it's rolled up. You're not seeing line items, you're not seeing what we're spending for controlled equipment, you're not seeing what we're spending for tasers and bicycles and shotguns and that kind of thing. You're just seeing it at a very high level, but knowing that that line item data is available in our database, and if you ask for it, you can have it. And then we move on to highlights and significant changes.
Excuse me.
Kelly, I wanted to
Yes.
ask you, could you go back 2 pages?
Absolutely.
I want to go, yeah. So if I have a categorical question, you can break that out for me if I ask,
Yes.
what are you spending on
Yes.
shotguns? Okay, you can
Yes,
pull that right up.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sorry, I get so excited. It's all in that database.
I knew you would. I just wanted to-
And the great thing about it is, I need all that data. I need all of that information. My team needs it. Our finance department needs it, because we audit. I am constantly looking at these budgets and measuring expenses, measuring revenues. My team does this. Analysts and departments do it. We all need this data. I'm not sure. You'll need to tell me if you need this data to make the decisions that we're asking you to make. I'm not sure that you do. You need us to be prepared to respond to your questions.
Right, and so on your initial pages, you offer your key performance measures. Will you be able to, that'll be answered if we ask the question then? How are we doing in terms of key performance measures? Or I'm a little concerned. I'm not sure why police are measured by response to our annual resident survey. Is that you're just trying it out on us?
Yes, just an example, please.
Yeah.
I can't stress that enough. Just an example.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Keep looking.
Staff will be working with council to develop those key performance measures. These are
Okay.
just examples.
Okay, thanks.
Member Milton, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do like this very
Oh, good.
much. However, when you say we can ask for the information, is this publicly information we can get to on a site, or we have to come directly to you to get this information? I mean, I think that's the difference for transparency is,
Sure.
is it readily available for me to get my hands on in the moment, or do I have to come get permissions?
It's a great question, and I will tell you, we haven't worked out all the details. I think at some point in the future, with upcoming versions of our database, our software that we use, there may be a public portal to be able to access that information. In advance of that, if we make this transition, it will be things that we may print or publish and have available online and indicate that they are a supplement to the budget document. So you would be able to access them online, for instance?
So just for clarification purposes, this is kind of what you're wanting us to start working with. Would we have the books readily available here in the chambers?
Staff would have that data. I would imagine you were really projecting a little bit into the future now, what next spring might look like.
Right.
Staff would have that data available so we could respond to your questions. And if we posted it online, if you were online, you'd have it available to you if you had a computer here. And if their question came up, we needed to pop it up on screen, we could pop it up on screen. Does that work?
I think. I'm kind of torn on it because I'm one of those people, it's like I want to be able to have that information at my fingertips. And I think until it's readily available online for us to get our hands on immediately, I would still encourage the books until that point. But I like this.
But
Trust me, I
think
really
if
like
we
it.
can make it, if we can publish it on the budget webpage and have that information available, just like the entire budget currently, this is all published out there. We have a very robust website for the budget, so we can make it available in that way.
Okay. Well, I like this.
Councilor Anderson?
Thank you very much. Budget Officer Jacobs, I remember, I think 2 or maybe 3 periods ago, we had a pretty extended discussion about police cars. And it was, how long do they last? The life is 5 years or 7 years, and how much do we save by extending out on all those sort of things? And there was some, there was some real money involved in ever-Dirksonian terms. So where does that fit into what we're talking about here? The materials, and I'm following up kind of on what Member Milton says, will that material ever be readily available to us, or?
You mean the equipment replacement
Getting down
list?
to the level of, replacement of cars.
Absolutely, I would imagine that would be, we would continue to provide that
Okay.
in the format that it's currently provided.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Cook?
I really like this format. And I just wanted to say, I know that with respect to the comments that have been made here, it's very important that we have all the facts and all the information. We don't want to tie our hands, but you used the analogy on our first budget meeting, drinking from a fire hose. I think this really puts the control of the faucet into the person that's seeking the information, which makes it much more transparent, because if you plop a book down like that in front of someone in our city, even though it's accessible and even though it's there, it's not in the proper context where you can actually use it. So this really helps to provide a budget that's more accessible to a wider range of people that aren't just sitting in this room. And I think I really, really am excited about it.
Good, thank you.
Get 3 big books.
Any other questions? I would look forward to any other input you have about this. This is a work in progress. These are just ideas. So if we don't have this form for you to provide the ideas to me, please just email them. I had a budget committee member do that earlier today, and it was great. So if you've got some thoughts about this, please share them with me.
Thank you. Thank you both. At this point, we're going to have the opportunity to discuss general policies and other issues or concerns with reference to this committee. So, do you have anything? Yes, Member Nordike.
Budget Officer Jacobs mentioned performance measures, and I would be very curious to see what those consist of. You know, I'm not an expert in analyzing police departments and knowing whether this police department is doing a fantastic job or where they are in the spectrum. So I think no matter how the performance measures are measured or made, I'd be curious to know what that process will look like, because you can set up performance measures that make it very difficult to meet or very easy to meet, and anywhere within that spectrum too. So I would think that in terms of my own ability to analyze data about departments that I don't personally work in, that I don't know like the city does or the departments do, it sounds to me like the performance measures could be really important in assessing each of these programs, and having credibility and accountability in that measuring process will be important to me.
Anyone else? We're good? Okay. Yeah. All right. All right. At this point, we'll take public testimony if there is any, but I don't believe so. No, okay, all right. Well, is there anyone present who would like to speak from the audience? Seeing none, okay, we'll move right on. Is there any other business for the Budget Committee this evening? Seeing none, the meeting is adjourned. Okay, and our next meeting is December 13th at 6 p.m. here in the City Council chambers. December 13th, 6 p.m. I'll see you then.
Good job.